It is October 21, 1600, and on a fog-covered plain in the heart of Japan, two of the greatest armies ever assembled on this island stand ready to destroy one another. Ishida Mitsunari, administrator, strategist, and the man who believes himself the rightful guardian of Japan's future, has spent years engineering this moment. Tokugawa Ieyasu, warlord, survivor, and the most patient man alive, has spent a lifetime waiting for it. By nightfall, one of them will be dead. The other will rule Japan for the next 260 years. This is the Battle of Sekigahara. The future of Japan hangs on what happens today, not just in terms of who holds power, but in terms of what Japan will become. If Mitsunari wins, the Toyotomi legacy survives. A child remains the nominal ruler. The Council of Warlords continues. The brutal century of civil war that has torn this country apart has a chance, however fragile, of giving way to something shared. If Ieyasu wins, one man rules everything. One family, one line, unchallenged, hereditary, permanent. The country that exists after today will be almost unrecognizable from the one that existed before it. Everything depends on 6 hours, and on a choice that one man on a hill does not yet know he is about to make. To understand why 300,000 men stood on that plain, we have to go back 20 years, to the death of the man who unified Japan and the impossible problem he left behind. His name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Born into poverty, risen to absolute power, he had done what no one before him had managed. He had ended the Sengoku period, a century of civil war, and brought the warring lords of Japan under a single authority. But in 1598, he was dying, and his heir, Toyotomi Hideyori, was 5 years old. A 5-year-old cannot hold power in a country full of warlords. Hideyoshi knew this. Before he died, he extracted solemn oaths from the 5 most powerful lords in Japan, the Council of 5 Regents, that they would govern together in his son's name until the boy came of age. The most powerful of those 5 was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu was everything Hideyoshi had not been by birth. He came from a lineage of warriors. He had survived the brutal decades of Japanese civil war, fought alongside the great warlord Nobunaga, survived the chaos that followed Nobunaga's assassination, and spent 30 years building himself into the second most powerful man in Japan. He was patient in a way that bordered on inhuman, and he had been waiting for his opportunity for a very long time. The ink on Hideyoshi's death was barely dry before Ieyasu began violating the terms of the regency. He formed political alliances without council approval. He arranged marriages between his family and other clans, marriages explicitly forbidden by the agreements he had sworn to uphold. He was building a coalition. Everyone could see it. The man who stood against him was Ishida Mitsunari. Mitsunari was not a battlefield commander. He was an administrator, arguably the finest Hideyoshi had ever produced. He understood logistics, taxation, supply chains. He did not understand people. His arrogance had made him enemies among the very warlord class whose support he needed. But he saw one thing with absolute clarity. If Ieyasu was not stopped now, the Toyotomi line was finished. He was right, and it did not save him.
In 1600, the crisis finally broke open. Ieyasu marched east to deal with the rebellious lord, pulling himself and his army away from Osaka. Mitsunari seized the moment. He issued a document listing 13 charges of treason against Ieyasu, rallied lords to his banner, and called his coalition the Western Army. Ieyasu turned his forces around and marched back west. By October, two sides had formed. The Eastern Army, 80 to 90,000 men under Ieyasu. The Western Army, nominally larger, perhaps over 100,000, though the effective fighting strength was more complicated than numbers alone could suggest. The Western Army held a strong strategic position, high ground, prepared defenses. If they held their position and fought defensively, they had every advantage. But here is what Mitsunari did not know. Among the lords who had answered his call, who had pledged their armies to his banner, who were at this very moment marching toward Sekigahara, several had already written to Ieyasu. The oaths were fresh, the ink was barely dry, and somewhere in that army, a 21-year-old lord named Kobayakawa Hideaki was riding toward the battlefield, carrying a secret that would end everything. The plain of Sekigahara sits in what is now Gifu Prefecture, in central Japan, a narrow valley surrounded by mountains, bisected by roads and rivers. By the night of October 20th, both sides were in position. The fog that settled over the plain that night was extraordinary, thick, cold, the kind that swallows sound. Men could not see 10 yards in front of them. Commanders could not locate their own units. The battle that was supposed to begin at dawn was delayed by hours as both sides waited for the world to reappear. When the fog finally began to lift, around 8 in the morning, the positions of both armies became clear. Mitsunari's Western Army held the high ground, their right flank anchored on Mount Nangu, their left on Matsuo Hill. At the center, some of the finest fighting men in Japan, Ukita Hideie commanding a substantial force on the front line, Mitsunari himself positioned further back on Sasao Mountain to observe and direct. On Matsuo Hill stood Kobayakawa Hideaki with 16,000 men. His position was critical. If the Western Army's flanks held, Ieyasu's forces would be funneled into a killing ground between the mountains. The trap was perfectly set. What Mitsunari did not know, or perhaps could not bring himself to fully believe, was that Kobayakawa had already promised Ieyasu that when the moment came, he would switch sides. He was not alone. On the southern flank, the forces around Mount Nangu were similarly unreliable. Messages had passed, promises had been made. Ieyasu had spent the months before the battle not just assembling an army, but carefully, deliberately buying the loyalties of men who were nominally fighting against him. The battle that was about to begin was already decided. But Mitsunari did not know that, and until the crucial moment arrived, neither did his army. The fighting opened in the east. Fukushima Masanori led the opening assault for the Eastern Army, crashing into the forces of Ukita Hideie at the center of the Western line. The fighting was fierce. Ukita's men held. For a time, the battle appeared balanced, two massive forces grinding against each other in the narrow plain, neither gaining decisive advantage. On the flanks, however, something was wrong. The forces on Matsuo Hill were not moving. The forces along Mount Nangu were not moving either. The Western Army's flanks, which should have been sweeping down to encircle the Eastern forces, stood still. Mitsunari's coordinated attack was not coordinating. There are accounts that Mitsunari sent messengers to Kobayakawa, that he fired signal shots toward Matsuo Hill, arquebuses discharged as a prompt, a demand, an order to advance. The young lord on the hill did not move. Ieyasu, watching from his position at the rear of the Eastern Army, understood exactly what this meant. Kobayakawa was hesitating.
The commitment he had made in private was harder to execute in the flesh, with the reality of the battlefield spread out beneath him, the cries of dying men rising from the valley below. For 2 hours, Kobayakawa Hideaki did not move. 2 hours, 16,000 men. The battle in the valley below grinding forward without him. The Western army holding, barely, while the man who was supposed to deliver it victory sat frozen on a hill. Mitsunari's cause was bleeding. Ukita's lines were thinning. Time was running out. Then the flags on Matsuo Hill moved. Kobayakawa Hideaki led his 16,000 men down from the hill and straight into the flank of the army he had sworn to protect. The effect was catastrophic. Ukita Hideie's forces, already holding against the Eastern Army's frontal assault, suddenly had enemies pouring into their side. The organized resistance collapsed. Men who had been fighting in formation were now fighting in chaos, unable to determine which direction the next attack would come from. In quick succession, other lords who had been waiting on the flanks followed Kobayakawa's lead. Wakisaka Yasuharu, Ogawa Suketada, Akaza Naoyasu. One by one, commanders who had marched under Mitsunari's banner switched. The Western Army did not simply lose, it disintegrated. Mitsunari watched it happen from Sasao Mountain. He had spent years preparing for this battle. He had believed, genuinely believed, that loyalty to the Toyotomi legacy would hold, that men who had sworn oaths would keep them. He had been wrong. Not about strategy, not about position, but about people. He fled the field. His retainers fought to cover his escape. 3 days later, he was captured hiding in the mountains near Ibuki. 3 weeks after that, he was executed in Kyoto. The battle itself had lasted 6 hours. Among the individual acts of the battle, one stands apart, not for its scale, but for what it reveals about the character of the men who fought that day. Shimazu Yoshihiro, the aging lord of Satsuma, had positioned his forces in the center of the Western Army. He had argued against the dawn attack. He had wanted a night assault, which Mitsunari had rejected. When the Western Army collapsed, Shimazu faced a choice shared by every commander on the field: surrender, flee in disorder, or attempt something audacious. He chose a third path. Shimazu led his men in a direct charge through the Eastern Army's lines, straight forward, into the teeth of the enemy, aiming to break through rather than retreat. It was a desperate maneuver called Sute Gamari, a rear-guard assault in which men sacrificed themselves to allow their lord to escape. His retainers died in waves, each group holding off the pursuit long enough for the next group to take their place. Ieyasu's generals pressed hard. Several were killed in the chase. Shimazu himself escaped. He reached Satsuma with only a few hundred men remaining of the force he had brought to the field. The Shimazu clan would not fully reconcile with Tokugawa rule for over 200 years. The aftermath of Sekigahara moved with extraordinary speed. Within weeks, Ieyasu had consolidated control of Japan. The lords who had fought against him faced judgment, some executed, some relocated, some stripped of domains. Those who had switched sides at the critical moment were rewarded. Kobayakawa Hideaki received expanded holdings. He would be dead within 2 years, reportedly haunted by guilt and visions of the men he had betrayed, though whether this was disease, madness, or the moralizing of later chroniclers is impossible to say. In 1603, Ieyasu received from the emperor the title of shogun, military ruler of Japan, the title that Hideyoshi, despite his supreme power, had never been able to claim because his lineage was not warrior enough to legitimize it. Ieyasu had the lineage. He had waited his entire life for the moment he could use it. He was 60 years old when he became shogun. He promptly abdicated 2 years later in favor of his son Hidetada, not as a withdrawal from power, but as a declaration. The message was unmistakable. The Tokugawa shogunate would be hereditary. The era of any lord with sufficient military force seizing supreme power was over. Japan was Tokugawa Japan now. The Tokugawa shogunate endured for 263 years. No major civil conflict disturbed it. Japan closed itself to the outside world, enforcing a policy of isolation that would hold for over 2 centuries. The samurai class was frozen in time, their function increasingly ceremonial, their culture becoming the highly codified system of aesthetics, obligation, and discipline that the world would eventually come to associate with feudal Japan. All of it traces back to 6 hours on a fog-covered plain. All of it traces back to a 21-year-old lord standing on a hill with 16,000 men, making a choice.
The irony of Sekigahara is that Mitsunari was not wrong about what Ieyasu represented. He understood with clear eyes that Ieyasu's ambition meant the end of the Toyotomi legacy. He fought to prevent exactly what happened. Toyotomi Hideori, the 5-year-old child in whose name the Western Army fought, lived. He was allowed to remain in Osaka Castle. For 15 years, Ieyasu tolerated his existence, a symbol of a previous era, surrounded and contained. In 1615, Ieyasu found his pretext. The siege of Osaka Castle ended with Hideori's death and the complete extinction of the Toyotomi line. Mitsunari had foreseen it all. He simply could not stop it. It is the evening of October 21st, 1600. The fog that obscured the plain at dawn burned away hours ago. What remains are the dead, 30 to 40,000 of them by some estimates, and a Japan that looks entirely different than it did that morning. Ieyasu stands at the threshold of everything he has worked toward for 50 years. The obstacles have been removed. The contest is over. The age of warring states, a century of civil conflict that had torn Japan apart, ended not with a gradual peace, but with a single day, a single betrayal, and a choice made on a hillside by a young man who could not hold his nerve. 260 years of order followed. Order built on that morning's treachery, on Ieyasu's patience, on Mitsunari's miscalculation, and on the particular cruelty of history, which has a way of giving final victory not to the man who deserves it, but to the man who survives. If you want to see what happened 15 years later, when Ieyasu finally moved to finish what Sekigahara started, the siege of Osaka Castle is next.